The Kerrville Folk Festival has been celebrating songwriters for 50 years. Kerrville's Grassy Hill New Folk Songwriting Contest has featured artists such as Adrian Linker, Anais Mitchell, James McMurtry, Lyle Lovett, Nancy Griffith, and Robert Earl Keane. Here everyone is greeted with Welcome Home, where life is simpler, kinder, and musical. The Kerrville Folk Festival. Put it on your bucket list.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for this panel today, presented by Folk Alliance International for Folk Unlocked. To begin, we want to recognize the complexity and privilege of gathering online today by sharing a digital land acknowledgement written by Adrian Wong of Spiderweb Show in Ontario and adapted for this webinar. Since our activities are shared digitally through the internet, let us take a moment to acknowledge the legacy of colonization embedded within the technologies, structures, and ways of thinking we use every day. We are using equipment and high-speed internet not readily available in many Indigenous and marginalized communities. We invite you to join in acknowledging our shared responsibility to make good of this time, and for each of us to consider our roles in reconciliation, decolonization, and active allyship. We hope that you will share your thoughts and observations in the Folk Unlocked chat box. This panel will be available for viewing for the remainder of the conference once it has aired at its scheduled time. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you the moderator of this discussion and the person who brought this dream team together for Folk Unlocked, Carissa Stolting. Welcome, Carissa.
Hi, thank you. Well, I just wanted to say it's such a treat to get to share this conversation with Tift and Allison and Leyla. I really wish we could be together in person, hopefully someday. But the idea for this panel stemmed from this deep creative work that you all are doing that is making large-scale works that dream bigger in terms of scope, but also in terms of mission and message that you hope to share. These works are they're weaving in and out of the structure of the commercial entertainment industry, but they also are paving entirely new ways and require new models, new definition of a team and team building, fundraising strategies, and definitions of metrics of success as well. So I just wanted to start off by kind of asking why. So my first question for each of you is just to start with the origin, the kernel, the idea, the origin of each of your works. Today we're going to be kind of more project focused on the specific works like Breaking the Thermometer to Hide the Fever, Leyla's theater work, like Allison Russell's upcoming album, and Tift and Allison together have collaborated on an archival and genealogical project that has a public performance-facing element called Hungry River. So there's a lot to dig into. With that said, origin story. Leyla, would you mind just telling us a little bit about Breaking the Thermometer and how it came to be?
Sure. Wow. So I guess I'll start by saying I'm a Haitian American musician and artist, and my work has been very engaged with understanding the connection between Haiti, my ancestral home, and the United States, my native sort of home. And basically, when I released an album in 2016 called A Day for the Hunter, A Day for the Prey, that was exploring particularly Louisiana-Haiti connections. I live in New Orleans. And I played at Duke performances. And when I was there, I got to meet a lot of scholars that were very engaged in this topic. And the head of Duke performances at that time, a man named Aaron Greenwald, approached me and asked me if I would be interested in doing a project from the archives, which is a collaboration between the library system at Duke and and do performances where they sort of pair an artist with an archive. And they had recently acquired the Radio Haiti archive. And Radio Haiti was a radio station that I think actually was founded in the 50s, but was taken over in 1970 by a man named Jean Dominique, who was assassinated later in the year 2000. He was an agronomist turned journalist, and so basically they asked me if I would make a piece about Radio Haiti, and I think that it has set me on this journey that has been deeply educational about late 20th century Haitian history, American history, my own sort of relationship to it, and it's taken over my life the past few months, and it's been great. But yeah, it does feel like this thing where I started thinking, okay, I'm going to make a project about Radio Haiti, and then it was like, okay, this is kind of becoming about myself, and then it was like, okay, is this theater? Is like, should we have dancers? Should we do video? What's the sound design going to be like? What's the music going to be like? Then it was like, is this an album? Is this a book? You know, like, it's just like, it feels like it just is like this really powerful tree that just keeps on sprouting branches. And I'm very grateful for that, because that's the kind of work that I want to be making. So yeah, there's more to be said there, but
yeah, and
we'll get into it.
Definitely want to talk more about how these works become trees and about the intersection of your own personal stories and the context, like historical context or social and societal context. So we'll dig in on all that in a little bit too. But I think next it might be a good segue to hear from Tift and Allison about Hungry River. Maybe Tift, you could start that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, I just to frame this in the music industry, since this is, you know, I have always had the feeling, or been given the feeling by the music industry, that I was to this for that, or to that for this, and yet, as Leyla was saying, is it a book? Is it a performance? Is it a play? I think all artistic mediums and genres have more in common than they do not in common. So it's very difficult to make myself, it's not satisfying to think in these traditional boxes. And my work actually came from a decision that I made, which at the time I was, you know, it felt very not really what I wanted to do, and very not glamorous. But I left New York City to return to my hometown to raise my daughter. I decided I did not want to raise my daughter on the road. And we toured for about 2 years, and then we stopped. And I just was going through a real period of reinvention, and a little bit of also disillusionment with how music and celebrity can intertwine. And I don't think it's very, like, I think it's really easy to be like, hey, look at, here's this picture of me and my cool breakfast. I mean, that's not deeply satisfying. It's very easy. So I didn't know what I was going to do. And it just turned out that the old asylum in my hometown, which had once been on the outskirts of town, was being reconstituted as a public park where, like, families were going to go be happy and throw a frisbee. And I realized that my daughter was the 4th generation female that had grown up really in the shadow of this hill, that we had all, even if we weren't a patient there or a family member of someone there, we had all been, like, told about, you know, if you weren't well behaved, they'd send you to the orphanage there, or they'd send you there. So we all navigated shame and society in the shadow of this place. And I thought, you know, it's my turn to push this story forward for my daughter. And maybe I am the person who could say something deeply rooted about this place. So I just was thinking about something like Spoon River Anthology and a site-specific deep dive in a world that really doesn't, that is often without context. And, I think you start with a feeling and a question and you lean in, and suddenly the tree is beginning to take over your life.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a willow tree.
Yeah.
I love that notion of the tree, of the journey of inquiry, which I think, and what is interesting to me is the connection with the past, that each of our projects and our shared projects sort of delve into. I know Leyla because of work that we do together in a group called Our Native Daughters with it's Leyla and I, Rihanna Giddens, and Amethyst Kia. And we did sort of a deep dive into the uncomfortable history of the Black diaspora in America, particularly from the point of view of women, of Black women, which obviously we are Black women, so we can only really write from our own points of view. But making those connections between what's come before, and Tift, that really hit me, what you said about you've grown up in the shadow of this place, of this asylum system, of this shaming, and so much of that system was used to shame Black people, shame women, get rid of parts of society that the dominant and, of course, white supremacist, patriarchal, dominant majority didn't want to see or didn't want to deal with or wanted to hide away. And I think that is such an element that affects each of us, that obviously it deeply affects the colonialism and white supremacist attitudes have horrifically affected Haiti, have horrifically affected women, have horrifically affected Black people, and so I love that I get to bear witness to this work that you both are doing, but also to work creatively together. I was when Tift reached out about this project, I mean, it was just an instant yes, I will do whatever I can. And interestingly, the first time we connected over it was actually when Leyla's piece, Breaking the Thermometer, was premiering as a Duke performance in its first iteration. And I know it's going to have a huge life, and the tree is going to grow, and other trees will pop up from that first one. But I feel, this was right before the pandemic hit in March, or hit here. And Tift already prophetically knew what was coming. I was still in La La Land about it. But we got to go see, we were working on Hungry River together, and we got to go see the dress rehearsal for Leyla's Breaking the Thermometer debut at Duke Performances. And it was, so with Abigail Washburn too, who had come down to do some.
Such a fun night.
I hold on, I treasure that memory, because really that was the last real gathering that I was, part of, a public gathering in that way. With friends. My last time I saw my sweet friend until now, basically. So I'm getting really emotional just thinking about it, and thinking about the life of these pieces that, they're, as Carissa said, they're going to have a life far beyond a recording or one performance. And they're going to grow, and they're probably going to involve other artists, and maybe other artists eventually staging their own versions of the works that we're coming up with. And I just think that's really exciting. I just got to kind of like.
Yeah, I also, just to add to that, I know we have to keep it moving, but just to add to what you were saying, Tiff, like just thinking about the things that we grow up in the shadow of, I kind of feel like I am just super drawn to that, because it's like personal, it's societal, it's community, it's, culture, it hits on so many things that kind of create who we are. And I'm just so interested in, I've always been really interested in exploring that and understanding that more deeply, because, it's like I'm trying to understand myself more, and then I'm also trying to help other people understand themselves. And then I'm looking at, the problems in our society, the fracturedness and the brokenness that we feel, and the divisiveness. Of course, we can't go a day without saying divisive.
Yeah.
You know, but it's just like, you know, it hits on so many things, I think, these projects. And it's like, is it, you know, I have this moment where I'm just kind of like, did I say yes to this because it was personal, or did I say yes to this because it was important for other people? And it's just, you know, there's no line there. It's all just the same thing, you know, in a way.
I think it's significant as well for the three of us, and just from conversations I've had in the past with you, Leyla, and from what you said just now, Tift, feeling called to do this work and maybe to be the person that can tell this deep and hard story, in part because you have a daughter now, and you don't want her to just grow up with this shadow and this shame without trying to illuminate some of it and maybe heal, do some sort. I feel like there's always this sense of trying to find connection and healing, you know, and recognizing that we're all interconnected and recognizing that we are responsible for what our children and their children and all the, not just our children, what our next generation of humanity inherits, that we are responsible for that. And I think becoming a mother for me made it, I couldn't hide from the past anymore. I had to face it, because if I, in my case, the project I'm working on separately from the Hungry River project is my first solo record, and similar to what Leyla and Tift were saying, it's going to have its first iteration as an album, but I hope that it will have a larger life than that. I'm working on a book, I'm working on poetry, I'm thinking about a mixed media performance eventually. And of course, these things are for the longer term. We're all still locked into pandemic restrictions. And so we're limited in what we can do in this moment, but we are absolutely unfettered in our imagination of what is possible at, you know, once we're through this time. And you know, it's very much connected. My history and background, I'm born in Montreal, mixed heritage, Scottish mother, Grenadian father, born in Canada. I was raised in foster care and then adopted by my mother's very, very abusive American expat husband. My adoptive father was a white supremacist man raised in a white supremacist family in a sundown town in southern Indiana. So even though I'm Canadian, the deep unhealed wounds of the time of slavery and the Civil War that twisted my father and his family, my adoptive father and his family, affected me very, very deeply as a child. You know, he was my primary abuser for upwards of a decade. And I, you know, ran away from home at 15, and the creative journey and awakening, you know, music really saved my life. And, you know, that has been something I've understood on a visceral level. But when I became a mother, it became clear to me that I had to go into my own past and excavate it and reckon with it, because it's not just my story. It's 1 in 3 women. It's 1 in 4 men. It's 1 in 2 non-binary, you know, or trans folks. And it's a pandemic. Like COVID is a horrific pandemic, but the pandemic of abuse and bigotry, which affects every part of our lives, including health, including, you know, ancient and ongoing. And it's only recently that we even think it's wrong. That's, you know, it's not like it's new. It's not like Me Too is new. It's what's new that we think it's wrong, right? And we're like, this is wrong, actually. We can't keep doing this.
And we're looking back at these larger stories and questioning how they were framed and reframing them. And I didn't mean to cut in, Allison, but what I really want to say is, what I think is so exceptional about this conversation from my point of view is that I am very drawn to complexity and what doesn't, I mean, that's usually the element of why something is worth telling a story of. And it is a very rare thing to find a group of people and a group of women in the music industry that are heading toward that complexity with such open heart and creative fervor. And I think a lot of times what is in the music industry at large is, why are you doing that, in a traditional sense? And I'm just really grateful to be in conversation with a sisterhood that appreciates the complexity and goes towards it and tries to bite off more than they can chew.
Amen.
Amen.
Yes.
Grateful. Sisterhood.
Well, I mean, I think that, fearlessly heading toward and embracing complexity, like just as a general ethos and marching orders, we just need that. And, and I do think that that also, when we think of, how these works are not fully served by the structure that exists to serve music right now, and that you have basically said, I'll take this and this from that structure because these things support me, but I'm also doing all of this, and the reach of this project can, have encouraged deeper, empathy. It can reach into communities. It can call forward and backward through time. It can bring things that have been swept under the shadows or have been shameful, call them forward and say we need to address them, and we can do it through music, which actually, can lower people's affective filters and allow them to be more receiving, open and receiving. So all of that is just so incredible. Allison also wanted to, one of the interconnective tissues that I saw through all three of you as well is just your mothers. And I wondered, just to kind of touch on that, what are these works being made now because becoming a mother made you say no more of, whether it was just logistical, I can't tour 150 dates a year, or no more of things being swept under the rug that need to be called forward. If you could just maybe touch on, did that it's just a common thread between the three of you. I wondered if you could touch on that. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, definitely. I have 3 kids, which blows my mind every day. I have a 6-year-old, and then I have 2.5-year-old twins. And I think actually, I always say I was working on breaking the thermometer for 3 years, and I forget that I also gave birth to twins during that time and released another album, and so there were a lot of life things that kind of maybe not delayed, but elongated the development time for this piece. And I think that there's, I think, just for me it's I can't hide from myself, and I have always wanted to do collaborations that were, I just love working with other people. I don't feel like I'm not the kind of person that needs to have all the ideas, and all the control. I really enjoy working with other people. I enjoy the process of exploring different mediums and how those mediums interact. And, this is history that, I think about that sometimes, how my kids will know so much more about Haitian history much earlier than I did when I was growing up. And that a lot of the work that I'm doing is because this is also what I didn't really get from my parents, that I've had to figure out on my own. I mean, I got plenty from my parents, but so yeah, it's kind of interesting. Maybe it's not just about being a mother, but it's about whose daughters are we too,
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I hear my daughter going, Mom, in the other room, shush, I'm working.
I can just say that being a mom, whatever the instincts that you had about the world and what that wasn't serving you, but you kind of put up with, it's not you just have this instinct of yeah, but that's not okay for my daughter. And I think a lot of the the instincts that have been amplified since I was a mother are, were there to begin with, but there's just no excuse to not act on them anymore. And that, my life is about making the world better, a better place for her to inhabit. And that doesn't mean like a better place for her. That means a better place as a whole.
Yeah, that resonates so deeply for me, Tift and Leyla, what you're both saying. And I think that was exactly it. Those instincts were there, but in my case, they were quite tattered and battered from just, there's lots of fallout from 10 years of early childhood abuse, and self-care is not, that not something I've been great at. And when I became a mother, exactly what Tiff said, stuff that I would have accepted for myself, no way, not for my kid. And there's a deep healing for me that has come with giving birth to my daughter and becoming her mother, her protector. It was also kind of a rebirthing of myself and realizing that I cannot, if I don't consciously change things that I grew up with and accepted as okay for me, or didn't accept necessarily, but was conditioned and brainwashed and sort of crushed into accepting then it repeats. We know that these cycles repeat. And I could not bear it for my kid. I had to get braver and stronger and pretend to be, even if I didn't feel that way, and make smarter decisions for myself. I mean, both my partner JT and I felt that way. Like we just got way smarter when our daughter was like, what have we been doing? And so part of it is the logistics of, we had been on this kind of hamster wheel of subsistence, working class musician touring, and really where we felt like if we weren't gigging 200 nights of the year, that we weren't really working, and just this kind of inertia of like, this is what we've been doing, so we're going to keep doing it. And as soon as Ida was born, I mean, a similar thing, Tift, where we dragged her around for 4 years on the road. I gave birth on December 30th of 2013, and we got on an airplane to tour Europe and the Netherlands and the rest of Europe on January 1st, 2014. She was not 4 weeks old yet,
Wow.
And or actually we left like December, or we left, when did we leave? No, end of January. So, but like not even a month. She was 3 weeks old. Her first passport picture, it's a newborn baby Ida, 2 weeks old, just screaming in terror because they made us wait. Have her eyes open, a newborn who's gonna look different 2 weeks later. It was just, I look at that passport and I just have like what did we do? And so we were on the road. I toured till I was 40 weeks pregnant. We hit the road running when she was 3 weeks old. And finally, when she was about 3 3/4, she sat her dad and I down. We had just moved to Nashville. She sat us down and she had an intervention. And she was like, I'm always gonna love the band and be part of the band, but I would like to go to school now. It's like not having it. And it really helped us to start envisioning, what we really wanted to do creatively and what that looked like. And was it touring 200 days of the year? No, that wasn't our dream. That wasn't, that was what we fell into. And, and then of course the pandemic hit. We were already starting to move this way in our minds. And then the pandemic hit, and suddenly there was this endless amount of time for meditation and reassessment, and very painful reassessment, but that was needed. That's been one of the silver linings for us. We needed to be forced to stop. And, I feel deeply grateful to have had this time to allow intuition to, you can't even be in touch with your own intuition if you're in constant motion and constant chaos, And so I felt like this time for me has been this like deep reconnection with intuition, and starting to learn to trust my intuition more and follow it and go exactly as you say, Carissa, like move into the deep complexity and uncertainty that surrounds us all, and interconnectedness, that surrounds us all. But is easy to forget about when we're just kind of on our individual hamster wheels.
Yeah. I mean, I think that motherhood for me has been deeply grounding in understanding what my actual artistic motivations are, because, you know, there's a part of me that's just like, I'm very aware of the choice to pursue this life as an artist, and and the impact that that has on my kids, both positive and negative. You know, when you're on the road, you're far away. When you bring all the kids, it's stressful. When you're far, it's just a big juggling act. But I think that is part of my ethos. That's part of who I am, and I think just being honest with myself and my children about that is really important to me.
I think it's really important for our daughters to see us succeed, fail, struggle, be real, and be out in the world making things happen. And it's not always pretty. It's just,
Yeah.
it's just in action. I really like for my daughter to see that. And I also want to say how important I think it is from a business point of view, from a management point of view, to just say that thinking about things in these new ways and reshaping things that don't serve us or our creativity. I mean, I think the hamster wheel is not, I think there's a certain amount of touring that is extremely exhilarating, very creative, and part of healthy practice, but the hamster wheel is not creativity. That's grind. And that I just want to say a huge thank you to Carissa for going toward for inventing ways to give projects and people like us infrastructure, because most people in the music industry shake their heads and go, what are you doing, and why can't you be one thing? And my intuition is usually not what anybody else's is, and I sit there and I go, oh God, if only I could have the instincts that the other people have, and put them on and make them easy. And it's just really these projects and these innovations need innovative systems and innovative people to help their gears turn. And I'm really grateful for you for bringing us together, and also for thinking about business the way that you do and projects the way that you do.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, part of the hope is, more projects like these need to exist. More, for so many reasons, the models that we're looking at in the commercial industry are not fully serving the projects. So I do want to talk a little bit about the team. That I had a question for everyone, maybe a little bit before that. Just going back into, each of you have said, okay, at this point of looking back, we've each recognized their projects that we are living in the shadow of something, or our own personal history has world, and it's becoming more and more clear because we are mothers, and we're needing to do this through these deeply, deeply, deeply rich projects that are not limited in this one way. And one of the things that I noticed too is that historical, research, digging through archives, researching statistics, all of this is informing these projects because they are one part personal journey, one part, historical or societal narrative. So I just wanted to ask, just sort of this is Tift, I stole this from you, but, research as creative process, and talk about, artists also as researchers. And my question is, for these types of works, whether you're digging through an archive or statistics, any form of information gathering that you're doing, how is your music and your creation addressing something that is missing from the archives, missing from the way that information is presented? If you could, if that inspires any thoughts, I'd be really curious, like, what's missing and how does art or music and personal story maybe call that forward. Yeah.
I guess, I just had a thought, so I guess I'll just jump in. The Radio Haiti archive is mostly recordings, audio recordings, mostly in Creole, a lot in French, and, is a lot of like editorials, and it's a lot of information. And I think what's missing from the archive is, what I really originally thought was I was going to make this piece that was just about Radio Haiti, and I hired a director early in the process to help me work on it. And the more that I would talk about these sound recordings and what they sort of evoked for me personally, the more that we realized that there's a personal story here that also needs to be told and also needs to kind of see the light. And so, I've been thinking a lot because we got to present the piece in May, and we're still sort of in this development process. We're nearing the end of it. But what has been really interesting to think about is that I am diaspora, and the role of the Haitian diaspora in, preserving Haitian culture, both in Haiti and abroad, and in legitimizing our own stories, because I think that there's a part of me that really kind of felt this sense of imposter syndrome. Like, I'm not Haitian enough to tell this story. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not Haitian, period. I'm Haitian American. I'm diaspora. And we have a specific role in righting some of the wrongs, I think, of our predecessors, of our families. When I say that, when I think about things like understanding voodoo, understanding Haitian spirituality and culture, and destigmatizing some of these things that have been stigmatized in our white supremacist environment, and just thinking about Blackness and how that isn't a monolith, but it has deeply affected my experience and my life, and the way that I see things, and how other people see me. And so I just feel like there's a lot there that you can't get from just a sound recording in Creole, that comes into play once you start to kind of connect the dots historically and personally, and and then you're just this human in this world processing your everyday life, and it's like, okay, there's a connection between all of these things. And so I think that the interaction with the archive is just a piece of the creative process. It's not the end all be all, and it's an essential piece, and it's important history to bring to light. But that history, like, it's, it doesn't get another life unless there's a fresh perspective or fresh eyes and ears, and and it's very vulnerable. I think that that's something that came up for me too. I hope I answered your question, Carissa.
Yeah, I mean, I think this, like,
sometimes it's like the tree metaphor really works well for this panel.
It does. But yeah, I guess that thought of giving life, breathing new life into breathing new life into history, or breathing new life through personal story, breathing new life into something that's been in the shadows, or something that needs to be addressed.
Or your own understanding of history, that you didn't even realize you had.
Right.
I mean, I think we're talking about also what is an archive, and an archive, there's so many, there are ways to keep an archive, and there are ways to unkeep the archive for what it doesn't tell you. And I mean, for me, I think the most important thing about research as creative process is it's a great form of procrastination, and you don't know what you're looking for or what you're doing when you start. But I knew that I was going to the margins, to these people who had been pushed away. And I was seeking them as prophets and keepers of essential knowledge. And I found these medical diagnosis and these intake records, this archive of intake records that was so completely reductive and didn't serve these people at all. And I just started collecting all these objects from the asylum, and I didn't really know what I was doing, but I realized that the archive that I had wasn't telling me the story, and I started listening to these abandoned objects for like this forgotten language of these people. And my project ended up then stumbling onto another archive, and it went a lot of different places. But I realized along the way that I was really happy that I wasn't a historian, because I was not going through history looking for facts, and I did not have to adhere to facts. I was looking for lyrical presences, and I was responsible to those lyrical presences. And so that's sort of my mantra. My favorite example, one example is that I found a moth in an intake record, and I thought that said more about how these people were treated than their reductive diagnoses.
So much of what we're talking about, and what's missing from the archive is we take these archival collections as sort of gospel truth, but who is telling the story,
Right.
and whose story are they trying to tell? Right? They're usually telling a much deeper story about the archivist than if I'm speaking of like archives of the past. I know we have much more awareness around this now, and that's talked about a lot for modern historians. Who is telling the story? What are your inherent biases? As what Leyla was saying, how is Haitian religion and spirituality been presented or caricaturized or diminished, by a white supremacist gaze and understanding. And I feel that it's very, very much the same with also, there are a few layers to this. How these stats that I'm talking about around abuse don't exist in a vacuum, right? That is an entire societal collusion to say this is fine. We abuse women and children and men and transgendered non-binary folks. That's what we do. That's what we have done. If you look through all of history, it's endless litanies of abuse. Like that's been the norm through our human history, and now we're trying, there's a real push, in the last century and this century towards human rights. And even having a notion of human rights is new. It's like a baby notion, right? And so there's what's missing from the archive. Obviously, women's perspectives, period. There's so little. And when you think of the vast collection of historical archive around the world, women are represented by generally a misogynist male gaze, very, very rarely through our own words and our own tellings and our own feelings. So, that was something that we were running up against a lot in the research that we were doing for Our Native Daughters, and why, Amethyst and I chose to retell the story of John Henry from Polly Henry's perspective. She's the one that didn't die doing the same work. She's the one that raised the kids. She's the one but all the stories are about John Henry, right? But but they're there. We're there. We are there throughout history, obviously, but it's usually in the spaces between or the footnotes that you find us. And so, particularly when talking about survival, and in my case, survival of intensive physical and sexual and psychological abuse, I feel that the stats don't serve us. They don't tell the stories of resilience and survival and how you heal and how you live beyond these things. The stats tell you how many people don't survive. The stats tell you how many people were injured or irrevocably harmed or killed. They don't tell the stories of resilience, and they don't tell the connection to our ancestral lineages of resilience through horrific what that was one of the things that when we were working on Our Native Daughters, and I was at the same time getting to know my biological paternal Grenadian family more, learning about that lineage, learning about my great many times great matriarch Kashiba, who survived being kidnapped, who survived being that horrific middle passage, who survived multiple sales, who survived all her children, multiple rapes, who survived her children being taken. I exist because of her. I am in the world now because of her and what she endured, which was far worse than anything that I've been called upon to bear ever, even given my painful childhood. And that those connections that are a lot, we are robbed of history, and particularly within the Black diaspora, we are robbed of history, but there are clues. And now it's a fascinating, I find all of the kind of deep delves into the human genome and people finding their ancestry through genetic testing, or that this is sort of giving people back a sense of place, and also making more people understand that we are mixed. We are I'm a mixed child who grew up with a white supremacist family. And so I've always had that uncomfortable understanding of there was no we for me to belong to easily. There was no easy tribe. There was no I'm this and they're that. It was always just like, I'm uncomfortable and nobody accepts me, on any side. I'm an Oreo to Black people. I'm an N-word to white people. I'm a, whatever. I wasn't comfortably fitting into any box, but that has been a gift as well, because nobody actually does. It's an illusion, right? This illusion of dichotomies, or of almost nothing is binary as far as I can tell, except for computer code, maybe. It's like spectrums of gender, spectrums of so-called race. We're actually all human races, but spectrums of ethnicity and lineage, spectrums of just everything is and history, the way we view history and understand it. It's not cut and dried. It's not black and white. It's, what's missing. So many perspectives are missing, and it's always told from the point of whoever the conqueror, the oppressor, the colonizer is, and that's a really biased perspective, and they have a vested interest in dehumanizing those that they have exploited, So, and of course, and when I say they, that's me too, I was just gonna add that I remember reading maybe it's in that book Between the World and Me, Ta-Nehisi Coates talks about how white supremacy is so insidious that we've actually just fabricated whiteness, when that's like a completely it's not a monolith either.
What is that? Right. Yeah, that's not a monolith. And then also the other idea that came to me is that in looking at a lot of particularly in Haiti, trying to understand some of the social dynamics that I both witnessed when I was in Haiti growing up as a child, and then among my Haitian family in the United States, and witnessing all this extreme poverty from a very young age, and kind of being very aware that I did not live in that scenario. It's just thinking about the colorism, like when people have
so intense
said to me, you don't look Haitian, and how am I supposed to take that? What does that mean? It's like, and that's even, I've had Haitian people even say that to me. So it's like, we are so programmed by our society to deny ourselves. And maybe that's also what some of these works are really about, is like, well, who am I actually? Who am I when I'm not being told what I look like or what I sound like, or, and for me, that's been a hugely healing process, personally, but also as an artist, to just be honest with myself about that, and to be able to see myself, Yeah. You can't see yourself, then how can you expect other people to see you?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And if we don't tell our own stories, who tells them, and how do they tell them? Right.
And how did what happened, what happened here, and how does that shape who I am and who made me and where I'm going from here?
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just the word courage just keeps coming to me over and over and over through this whole conversation. I've had the chills so many times. I just think what you're doing is so brave in so many different ways, through the message that you're sharing and through the ways, like a tree, that you choose to do it, and ways that you are pulling from your individual experiences of not ever fitting into a box and making art that doesn't fit into a box either, and are just breaking new ground and creating a new path that I hope will encourage even more work like this, and for people to, shed things that aren't serving them in an industry and think bigger and broader. And Tift, I did want to say thank you so much. I'm not the best at accepting compliments, but I really appreciate your kind words about, wanting to support this work. And so for the last couple of minutes, I do want to talk about the teams that are needed. And, for full disclosure, I work with each of you in different capacities. In one capacity as with Leyla and Allison as an artist manager, where we work together on all facets of your careers, but also with Tift and Allison, project specific for Hungry River, and Leyla, project specific for Breaking the Thermometer. I have started with a couple of collaborators, a nonprofit that works to support these kind of works, because I do hope that more exist. But I wanted to talk about not necessarily that piece of it, but just the team, building the team. If we could talk about like the partnerships that are surrounding these creative projects, maybe even apart from the management side, but if you could just comment on what the fundraising process was like, because you're not necessarily getting, these can have and will have maybe traditional record label advances, but what fundraising looks like, who you need on that side, what university or community partnerships have really enhanced this. If you could just talk about the team, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, for Breaking the Thermometer, I had Duke Performances, who were kind of like, the main commissioner. We brought on two co-commissioners, Miami-Dade College, which has a huge Haitian population, and the Contemporary Arts Center, also known as the CAC, here in New Orleans. And so that was like the commissioning partners. Duke, along with Kyoko McCrae, who directed the piece and has also produced the piece, did the bulk of the grant writing and fundraising. I mean, I had to write I've written several artistic statements over the genesis of this process for various grants. And, New Music USA supported us. We got a MAP Fund grant. And there were many other small grants. So it wasn't just the funds coming from Duke. We always started the project with the understanding that we were going to need to apply for grants. And then the biggest success in terms of fundraising was we were awarded a grant from the Kellogg Foundation, who have an office both in New Orleans and Louisiana, and a vested interest in narrative change around Haiti, which to me, when I hear narrative change, it's actually just like telling the truth. And hearing creative, ways, figuring out creative ways to do that. And so the Kellogg grant allowed us to, we're still almost at the finish line, but we're working on getting through the end of the development period. Allowed me, I'm so grateful for this, allowed me to record the bones of my Breaking the Thermometer album, because I did start to realize, this is an album. I'm crazy to think this isn't an album. I have to record these songs.
Yeah, that's a piece of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then to also bring the piece to Haiti, hopefully in the fall of 2021. We'll see. I don't know what to believe these days, but that has been, talk about a tree. It's like, we raise all this money and then it disappears and we're like, oh my God, and then we have to do something else and we need to figure out how we're going to, go to this next piece. But the other piece of it is on the artistic side, figuring out, I got to develop songs with a drummer. The drummer who plays in my band, his name is Sean Myers. He's an incredible drummer and percussionist. He's lived in Ghana and Haiti, which is like oddly parallel to my life. And he's been initiated in voodoo. He had a very close relationship with Hugon and Haitian percussionist named Fanfan, Fanfan Louis, who came to the United States as part of Catherine Dunham's dance company, and has been a pillar for the Haitian voodooism community in the United States, and is an incredible percussionist. So I had the honor of developing a lot of these songs with Fanfan and Sean, and sadly Fanfan was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and passed away a couple months later during this development process. Just a devastating, part of this puzzle. And we were able to bring on another incredible percussionist named Jeff Pierre, who kind of got us through the premiere. And also working with a beautiful dancer named Sheila Anosier, who's like a dance. There's no art form, I think, that she doesn't explore. And she's just a beautiful, wonderful person. I met her several years ago, living in Brooklyn when I was about 18 years old. And we had the honor of working with her, in addition to a sound designer, lighting designer, technical director. So this is definitely the biggest project I've ever done, and it's been a huge, huge learning experience. This is my daughter, Delilah.
I miss you so much, Delilah. I miss you so much.
We just need
Well, we only have just a few minutes left, but I was wondering, Tift, if you wanted to comment, and Allison, on the team building side for Hungry River.
Well, I can just say very quickly that the team that we have been building, which includes Carissa and Allison and Duke, and a board of advisors across the state and across the country, has been I'm so proud of it, but it's been a long time. And I just want to say to anyone who's working on a big sprawling project that you want funding for, the seeds of Hungry River, it's been 2 years in coming. And about a year ago, I have never been broker in my whole life. And every day I was driving to a former insane asylum, digitizing photographs that were 100 years old, and going, what am I doing? But I could not do anything else. And it is something that is just so deep in my heart, and the people that I have met, both in the pictures and on the team, and the risk that it was to pursue something that did not have a dollar sign, but had seemed tattooed on my heart, has been more satisfying than anything I could have imagined.
Yeah. And it's exciting because there are new, kind of relationships starting to come out of this. We've been reaching out to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, who also supported Leyla and I, the Smithsonian, with the Our Native Daughters Project. And we are hoping, our deep hope is to repatriate and rematriate these photos to get these people home to their families, and that's a huge part of this journey with Hungry River. And then for my album, which is coming out later this year on Fantasy Records, I'm very grateful to them for coming on board and helping me tell my own story and delve deeper, hopefully, with that story as well, and connect it to the past and other stories. But also, I would not have been able to do any of it without the support of the Canada Council of the Arts. They helped me through the writing period and the initial recording, recording sessions. And I just have to say how important arts funding actually is, and how much it's not just the arts. Like, there's no STEM and the arts are intertwined. They're not separate. And I think that we have a very unfortunate tendency, particularly in this country, in the US, where my adopted country now, to demean the arts and to say, oh, it's frivolous or it's extra but they are in fact life-changing and life-saving. And they inform our empathy. They teach us empathy. And we saw for the last 4 years what happens when there's governance without empathy. And it's hideous, and it leads to authoritarianism and fascism, and we don't want that anywhere, I don't think. So it's the arts are very, very, very important, and I'm deeply grateful to my home country, Canada, for continuing to support the arts, and they've supported me directly. And this project I wouldn't have had been able to put a roof over my head or feed my daughter without their help during this time, this pandemic time in particular. So I'm really, really grateful for that.
Wow. Thank you all so much. This was just really lovely to get to see all of your Zoom squares.
You all, Leyla, who I miss so much, my poor niece.
Well, thank you to everyone who joined this webinar presented by Folklines International. We hope you found the ideas presented here useful. And a huge thank you to our esteemed panelists, Carissa Stolting, Tift Merritt, Leyla McCalla, and Allison Russell. Thank you so much. This panel will continue to be available as a recording on the Folk Unlocked platform all week. Please also take a moment to provide feedback about today's webinar by dropping some comments in the chat. And finally, Folk Unlocked is made available at an open price point thanks to the generosity of our donors. If you would like to support our work, donations can be made at folk.org/donate. I hope you stay safe and connected to the community. We will see you at the next panel.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.